"You're fired. Pack your things and get out of my building." The words echoed across the polished granite floors of the executive level. A man in a blue custodial uniform stood there, yellow-gloved hands still gripping a mop handle, his expression unreadable. Not hurt, not angry, just observing. The manager, Chester K. Lower, thought he was exercising authority. He thought he was eliminating dead weight, cleaning up the workforce. But he had no idea that the man he was publicly humiliating wasn't just a janitor. He was the majority shareholder who'd acquired 67% of the company at midnight, now CEO-elect, watching every executive's true character before his official introduction. 10 minutes later, Chester's career wouldn't just be over. He would be escorted out by the same security he'd threatened to call. This is the story of how prejudice met ultimate accountability. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.
But before we dive into this absolute masterclass in karma, do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Stories like this, they don't just entertain. They remind us why character always wins in the end. You're going to want to be here for what comes next.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Timeline Stories. Today's story, absolutely wild. Let's go into it.
Now let's dive in. It was 6:47 a.m. on a Monday at Apex Industries headquarters in downtown Manhattan. The early morning light cut through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across Italian marble that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a week. It was the kind of building where power lived. 53 floors of steel, glass, and corporate ambition. Moving quietly past the executive portraits on the 47th floor, pushing a regulation cleaning cart with a squeaky wheel, was a man the day shift would later know as the new guy. He wore a standard-issue blue custodial uniform, yellow rubber gloves that made his hands look oversized, and work boots that whispered against the polished stone. To the early arrivals streaming past him toward their corner offices, he was invisible, just another member of the service class that kept their world gleaming. But his name wasn't the new guy. It was William B. Reyes. William was a legend in private equity circles. 22 years of building companies from the ground up, an MBA from Wharton earned while working full-time, and an acquisition track record that made investment bankers nervous. Today, however, he wasn't a billionaire or a CEO. He was reconnaissance. "Ninth floor clear?" William murmured, his voice barely audible as he bent to retrieve a discarded coffee cup. The recording device in his shirt pocket, disguised as an employee badge, captured everything. Moving to the executive level, the board had no idea he was already in the building. His official introduction wasn't scheduled until 9:30 a.m., the emergency meeting they'd called to announce the new ownership structure. But William had learned decades ago that you don't understand a company's culture from the boardroom. You understand it from the bottom, where people think no one is watching. And right now, striding toward him with the confident gait of someone who'd never questioned his own authority, was Chester K. Lower, Regional Operations Manager, 10-year veteran. Performance reviews that praised his decisive leadership, while quietly shuffling discrimination complaints to HR's circular file. Chester's eyes locked onto William. His expression shifted. The micro-calculation people make when deciding whether someone deserves basic courtesy. William had seen that look 1,000 times. He knew exactly what came next. He just needed Chester to say it out loud. And what Chester said? It would seal his fate in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. William's alarm went off at 4:47 a.m., but he was already awake. He'd been staring at the ceiling of his hotel suite for the past hour, running scenarios. The acquisition had closed at midnight. $2.3 billion in cash and stock that made him the single largest shareholder in Apex Industries. By 9:30 this morning, every executive in that building would know his name. But right now, in the pre-dawn darkness, he was nobody. He pulled on the uniform he'd ordered 3 weeks ago, the exact shade of blue worn by Apex's custodial contractor, complete with an embroidered name patch that read, Will. The yellow gloves went into his cart along with industrial-grade cleaning supplies he'd studied YouTube videos to learn how to use properly. He couldn't afford to look incompetent. People noticed incompetence, even in janitors. He needed to be invisible. If the loading dock entrance was exactly where the facilities manager had described it during due diligence, though that manager had no idea why William's consulting team had asked such detailed questions about building operations. William badged in using credentials that had cost his security chief a significant favor with the contracting company. The timestamp read 5:52 a.m. The break room in the sub-level smelled like burnt coffee and bleach. 4 people sat around a folding table, thermoses open, trading the kind of quiet conversation that comes before the real work starts. William recognized the dynamic immediately. This was the crew that actually ran the building, the people who knew where every skeleton was buried because they'd swept around the bones. New guy? A woman in her 50s looked up, her name tag reading Gloria. Her eyes were sharp, assessing. First day, William said, keeping his voice even. Still learning the routes. You'll want to start on 47, said a younger man, Miguel, gesturing with his coffee. Executive floor. They like it pristine before the suits show up. Spill anything up there and Henderson will have your head. He said Henderson, the way you'd say the IRS. Henderson? William asked. Gloria snorted. Facilities director. Thinks he runs the building. Mostly he just runs his mouth. She studied William for a moment longer. You look like you've done real work before. Where are you coming from? Couple different places, William said, which was technically true. Trying to find something stable. Miguel nodded like he'd heard that story 1,000 times. Well, welcome to stable. It pays nothing, but at least it's consistent nothing. The table laughed, the bitter kind. William noted the dynamic. These people had been rendered invisible so long they'd stopped expecting to be seen. Gloria took pride in her work anyway. Miguel had given up but showed up. The third crew member, James, hadn't spoken yet. Just watched William with the wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust new faces. By 6:40 a.m., William was pushing his cart toward the elevator, armed with more intelligence than any consultant's report could provide. He knew who took smoke breaks where, which managers said please to the cleaning staff, and which ones walked past like they were furniture. He knew exactly what kind of company he'd just bought. Now he needed to see how bad it really was. And what he was about to discover on the executive floor? It would confirm his worst fears about the toxic culture festering at the heart of Apex Industries. The executive floor was everything the break room wasn't. Hushed, expensive. Designed to remind you that power lived here. William moved his mop in slow, deliberate arcs across marble that cost more than most people's cars. His eyes tracking everything while appearing to focus on nothing. Oil paintings of former CEOs lined the walls, all of them white men in their 60s, all of them wearing the same expression of cultivated authority. He'd been working for 12 minutes when he heard the elevator chime. Chester K. Lower stepped out like he owned the floor, which, in a sense, he did. Regional Operations Manager, 10 years with the company, corner office with a view of the Hudson. He wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost $4,000, Italian shoes that clicked against the marble with metronomic precision, and a Rolex that caught the light just so. His hair was perfectly styled, his jaw was square, and his posture radiated the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. For exactly 3 seconds, Chester's expression was neutral, the default face of a man moving through his domain. Then his eyes landed on William. The shift was instantaneous. His shoulders drew back, his chin lifted, his eyes narrowed in that particular way people do when they've encountered something out of place, something that doesn't belong in their carefully ordered world. William had seen that expression on 1,000 faces across his lifetime. The micro-calculation of status, the snap judgment that decided whether someone deserved basic human courtesy. Chester stopped walking. William continued mopping, the motion smooth and unhurried, his face carefully blank. He'd learned decades ago that the best way to observe predators was to make yourself uninteresting prey. "Excuse me." Chester's voice carried that sharp edge of someone who expected immediate compliance. Not rude yet, but close. Testing. William looked up, met his eyes for exactly the right amount of time, long enough to acknowledge him, short enough to signal deference. "Yes, sir?" The "sir" seemed to satisfy something in Chester. He took 2 steps closer, his body language shifting from neutral to proprietary. "What are you doing up here?" It wasn't really a question. It was a challenge wrapped in corporate politeness. "Cleaning, sir," William said evenly. "Floor rotation. Executive level gets serviced before 7. Chester's eyes traveled down William's uniform, then back up to his face, and the assessment so obvious it might as well have been spoken aloud. "I don't recognize you. You new?" "First day, sir." "First day." Chester repeated it like the words themselves were suspicious. "And they put you on the executive floor? On your first day?" He said it the way you'd question someone claiming to be a surgeon after watching a YouTube video. "Following the route sheet, sir." William gestured toward the clipboard attached to his cart. "Says executive level, 6:45 to 7:30. Chester didn't look at the clipboard. He was too busy looking at William, his expression hardening into something that went beyond mere suspicion. "Does your supervisor know you're up here? Do you have clearance for this floor?" The word clearance hung in the air like an accusation. William felt something cold settle in his chest. Not anger, not yet. Just recognition. He knew exactly where this was going. He just needed Chester to take the first step. And Chester? He was about to take not just one step, but a full sprint into the worst decision of his entire career. Chester took another step closer, close enough that William could smell his cologne. Something expensive and overpowering. The kind of scent designed to announce arrival before the man wearing it entered the room. "I asked you a question," Chester said, his voice gaining volume. "Do you have authorization to be on this floor?" "Yes, sir," William replied, keeping his tone even. "As I said, it's on the rotation." "I don't care what's on your rotation." Chester cut him off with the casual dismissiveness of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art. "I care about protocol. This is the executive level. We have sensitive materials up here, confidential documents, strategic planning." He gestured broadly at the closed office doors as if they contained nuclear launch codes. "Now, we can't just have anyone wandering around." The word anyone landed with particular weight. William registered movement in his peripheral vision. 2 junior executives had emerged from their offices, drawn by Chester's rising voice like sharks to blood in the water. They lingered near the coffee station, pretending to fiddle with the espresso machine while watching the scene unfold. "I understand, sir," William said. "I can call down to facilities if you'd like to verify." What I'd like, Chester interrupted, his voice now loud enough to carry down the hallway, is for you to explain why you're moving so slowly. I've been watching you since I got off that elevator. You've covered maybe 6 square feet in the time I've been standing here. He crossed his arms, his body language shifting into full prosecutorial mode. Or is this how you people approach work? Take your time, milk the clock, do the bare minimum? You people. The phrase hung there, ugly and deliberate. A third employee appeared, a woman in her 30s carrying a leather portfolio. She stopped mid-stride when she saw the scene, her eyes darting between Chester and William. She didn't leave, though. She joined the audience. William kept his hands steady on the mop handle. I'm being thorough, sir. These floors require thorough. Chester let out a sharp laugh, the kind designed to invite others to join in the mockery. Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're stalling, dragging out a simple task so you can avoid actual work. He turned slightly, playing to his growing audience. You know what I think? I think you're up here hoping to pocket something valuable. I think you saw executive floor and thought it was an opportunity. William's jaw tightened, the first crack in his carefully maintained composure. Sir, I can assure you. You can assure me? Chester's voice dripped with contempt. You've been here one day and you're assuring me? Let me tell you what I know about first-day employees who get defensive. He stepped even closer, invading William's space with the confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences. They're usually hiding something. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to empty your pockets, right now. Then you're going to show me what's in that cart. Every single compartment. The hallway had gone completely silent, except for Chester's voice. William looked at him, really looked at him, and saw everything he'd suspected about this company confirmed in one man's sneer. Sir, William said quietly, is that really necessary? Chester smiled. I think it's necessary. But Chester wasn't done. Not even close. What came next would be recorded on William's hidden device. Every vile word, every degrading comment, evidence that would seal Chester's fate forever. William slowly set down his mop and reached for the clipboard attached to his cart. His movements were deliberate, controlled. The kind of careful precision that comes from years of being watched for any excuse to escalate. He held out the work order, the plastic sleeve catching the overhead lights. Chester snatched it without a word, his eyes scanning the paper with theatrical intensity. This says 6:45 to 7:30. It's 7:14. You should be almost finished by now. He thrust the clipboard back at William. But here you are, barely halfway through. Want to explain that? These floors require proper buffing techniques, sir. If I rush... Buffing technique? Chester's laugh was sharp and mean. It's mopping. You push the mop back and forth. It's not exactly rocket science. He gestured at the stretch of floor William had cleaned. Look at this. You've got streaks everywhere. Missed that corner completely. Is this the standard of work you think is acceptable here? William glanced at the floor. It was flawless. He'd made sure of it. But Chester wasn't looking at the floor. He was looking at the audience, making sure they were paying attention. I can go over it again, sir, William offered. You shouldn't have to go over it again. You should do it right the first time. Chester's voice had taken on that particular rhythm of someone delivering a speech they'd rehearsed. That's the problem with the entitlement culture we've got these days. Nobody wants to put in real effort. Everybody wants a paycheck for showing up, but nobody wants to earn it. One of the watching executives shifted uncomfortably. The woman with the portfolio looked down at her shoes. Chester was just getting started. You know what I've noticed? There's a certain mindset that comes with certain people, a lack of personal responsibility, an expectation that the world owes them something just for existing. He circled William like a prosecutor approaching a witness. My grandfather came to this country with nothing. Nothing. He worked 70-hour weeks in a factory, saved every penny, and never complained. That's the kind of work ethic that built this country. William's jaw muscles flexed. His hands, still holding the clipboard, tightened until his knuckles showed pale against his skin. Chester leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a stage whisper that somehow carried even further. But that kind of discipline, that kind of dedication, it has to be taught. It has to be cultural. And some cultures, frankly, just don't value hard work the way others do. It's not about race, he added quickly, the qualifier that always followed these statements. It's about values, about priorities, about whether you're raised to take pride in a job well done or raised to do the minimum and blame everyone else when you fail. William's breathing remained steady, but something behind his eyes had gone very cold. He was cataloging every word, every inflection, every watching face that said nothing. The recording device in his badge pocket captured it all in crystal clarity. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" Chester asked, his tone suggesting he thought William might not be capable of comprehension. "Yes, sir," William said quietly. "I understand perfectly." And Chester, drunk on his own perceived power, was about to escalate this from workplace harassment to a full-blown public execution. What did he say next? You won't believe it. Chester turned to face his audience fully now, his back partially to William, addressing the gathered employees like a politician at a rally. The performance had reached its crescendo, and he wasn't about to waste it. "This," he said, gesturing back at William without looking at him. "This is exactly what I've been talking about in our management meetings. This is the rot we need to cut out if we're going to remain competitive." His voice carried down the hallway, confident and clear. "We've got standards at Apex Industries. We've got a reputation. And that reputation is being undermined every single day by people who think showing up is the same thing as performing." A fourth employee had appeared, a younger man in his 20s, clutching a coffee mug, his eyes wide. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, but couldn't seem to make his feet move. "You want to know what's wrong with this company?" Chester continued, warming to his theme. "We've become soft. We've prioritized inclusivity over excellence. We've been so worried about being fair that we've forgotten to demand competence." He turned back to William, his expression a mixture of contempt and satisfaction. "And the result is standing right here in front of us. Someone who can't even mop a floor properly but expects to collect a paycheck anyway." The woman with the portfolio shifted her weight, her lips pressed into a thin line. She still said nothing. "I've been patient," Chester said, his voice rising again. "I've given second chances. I've tried coaching, training, and performance improvement plans. But you know what? Sometimes you have to accept that certain people just aren't cut out for professional standards. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is set them free to find their level somewhere else." He crossed his arms, his posture radiating finality. "This company is about to undergo some major changes. New ownership, new direction, new expectations. And I'll tell you right now, I'm going to make sure we clean house, starting with the cleaning crew." A couple of people in the audience exchanged glances. One of the junior executives looked distinctly uncomfortable, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. But no one spoke. No one stepped forward. The collective silence was its own kind of participation. William stood perfectly still, his hands now at his sides, his yellow gloves bright against the blue of his uniform. His face remained neutral. But if you looked closely enough, if you were paying real attention, you could see the controlled fury in the set of his shoulders, the careful deliberation in his breathing. Chester seemed to take the silence as validation. Does anyone here disagree with my assessment? He looked around at the gathered employees, his eyebrows raised in challenge. Anyone want to defend this kind of substandard performance? Anyone want to tell me I'm being too harsh? The hallway remained silent. That's what I thought, Chester said with satisfaction. He turned back to William, his decision clearly made. I've seen enough. You're exactly what's wrong with the entitlement culture in this country. You want something for nothing. Well, not on my watch. William met his eyes and said nothing at all. You know what? I need to pause here for just a second. Know that if you're feeling what I'm feeling right now, that burning sense of injustice, that desperate need to see Chester get what's coming to him, then you need to subscribe to this channel. Because we tell stories that matter. Stories about karma, about justice, about what happens when arrogance meets accountability. And if you don't subscribe, you might miss the next story that absolutely changes your perspective on workplace dynamics, on power, on human dignity. Don't let that happen. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on the bell. Because what happens next? It's the most satisfying thing you'll see all week. Now, let's get back to it. Chester was about to deliver the final blow, the termination that he thought would cement his authority. But he had no idea that with every word, he was digging his own professional grave deeper and deeper. Chester pulled out his phone with the dramatic flourish of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. I'm calling facilities right now, getting your supervisor on the line. But let me save everyone some time. He lowered the phone, fixing William with a look of absolute certainty. You're fired. Effective immediately. The words echoed down the marble hallway. William didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there in his blue uniform, yellow gloves still on his hands, looking at Chester with an expression that was impossible to read. Did you hear me? Chester's voice sharpened. I said you're fired, terminated. Your employment with the custodial contractor for this building ends right now. He pointed toward the elevator. Leave the cart. Leave the supplies. Walk to that elevator and exit the building. Do not stop at the break room. You do not collect your things. Just leave. One of the watching executives, the young man with the coffee mug, opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. The woman with the portfolio had gone pale, her knuckles white against the leather. William reached up slowly and began removing his right glove, one finger at a time. The yellow rubber peeled away with a soft sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. Then the left glove. He held them both in one hand, his movements unhurried, deliberate. Sir, William said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. Are you certain this is the action you want to take? Chester's eyes narrowed. Are you questioning me? After everything I've just said, you dare to question my decision? I'm simply asking if you're certain, William repeated, and his tone still calm, still even. Because once this decision is made, there's no taking it back. I don't want to take it back, Chester snapped. I've never been more certain of anything in my professional life. You're exactly the kind of employee this company needs to eliminate. So yes, I'm certain. completely certain. He raised his phone again. "And if you're not moving toward that elevator in the next 10 seconds, I'm calling security to escort you out." How would you like that on your record? Fired and forcibly removed on your first day? William looked at him for a long moment. The kind of look that seemed to see through skin and bone to something deeper. Then he nodded once, a small, precise movement of his head. "All right then," William said softly. "You've made your choice." He set the yellow gloves on top of the cleaning cart and arranged them neatly side by side. Then he turned toward the elevator without another word, his work boots silent against the marble Chester had accused him of cleaning poorly. Chester watched him go with visible satisfaction. "That's right. Walk away, and don't bother using Apex Industries as a reference." William pressed the elevator call button and waited, his back straight, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. The doors opened with a soft chime. He stepped inside, turned to face the hallway one last time, and met Chester's eyes as the doors began to close. His expression hadn't changed at all. The elevator descended in silence. Chester had no idea, absolutely no idea, that in exactly 10 minutes, his entire world was about to implode in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. Chester was still riding the high of his performance when his phone buzzed. The gathered employees had dispersed, returning to their offices with the relieved expressions of people who'd witnessed an execution and were grateful it wasn't them. He'd already texted his supervisor a summary of the incident, framing it as proactive leadership in maintaining workplace standards. The notification on his screen made him pause mid-stride. "Urgent. All senior management to the executive boardroom. 9:30 a.m. sharp. RE. Ownership transition announcement. Attendance mandatory." Chester's pulse quickened, the good kind of adrenaline. This was it, the new owner. He'd heard rumors swirling for weeks about the acquisition, whispers in the break room about private equity, about a mystery buyer who'd paid cash, and the official announcement was supposed to come today. But he hadn't expected to be included in the initial meeting. Senior management. They were treating him like senior management. He glanced at his Rolex. 9:18. 12 minutes. He ducked into his office, checking his reflection in the window that overlooked the city. The Tom Ford suit looked sharp, hair perfect. He straightened his tie, silk, navy with subtle silver stripes, and practiced his handshake grip. First impressions with new ownership were everything. This was his chance to establish himself as the kind of leader the company needed going forward. Strong, decisive, unafraid to make tough calls. He thought about the janitor, already gone from the building, probably sitting in some unemployment office, wondering what happened. Chester felt a flash of satisfaction in that interaction this morning. That was exactly the kind of proactive management new owners appreciated. Someone willing to maintain standards, to make hard decisions, to protect the company's culture from mediocrity. He should mention it, not immediately, of course. But if the conversation turned to company culture, to workforce optimization, to his management philosophy, he had a perfect recent example. Real-time leadership. He'd literally fired someone this morning for substandard performance. How many managers could say they'd taken decisive action on day one of new ownership? Chester grabbed his portfolio. Leather, expensive, mostly empty, but it looked professional, and headed toward the boardroom. The hallway was filling with other senior managers, all wearing the same expression of nervous anticipation. Jessica from HR, Tom from finance, David from strategic planning, the inner circle. Big day, Tom said, falling into step beside Chester. Huge, Chester agreed. Any idea who it is? Tom shook his head. Board's been keeping it locked down. All I know is it's a single buyer, someone with serious capital. They rounded the corner to the executive wing. The boardroom doors were already open, and Chester could see the long mahogany table inside, the leather chairs, the wall of windows overlooking Manhattan. A few board members were already seated, their expressions unreadable. Chester felt his confidence surge. This was his arena. This was where he belonged. He checked his tie one more time, rolled his shoulders back, and walked through the boardroom doors with the assured stride of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. 10 feet inside, he froze. What Chester saw at the head of that table, it would shatter his reality so completely, so absolutely, that his brain would literally stop processing information. At the head of the table, seated in the chairman's position like he'd been born to it, was William. Not William the janitor. Not the man in the blue custodial uniform with yellow gloves and a mop cart. William B. Reyes. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than Chester's car. Bespoke, perfectly tailored to his athletic frame, the kind of craftsmanship that whispered old money, even though William had built every dollar himself. A crisp white shirt, a tie in deep burgundy silk, gold cufflinks that caught the light. His hands were folded calmly on the mahogany table in front of him, and his expression was exactly as unreadable as it had been in the elevator 20 minutes ago. Chester's brain simply stopped processing. His feet stopped moving. His breath caught somewhere between his lungs and his throat. The portfolio slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a sound like a gunshot. Every head in the room turned toward him. "Mr. Lower," the board chairman said from his position at William's right hand. Richard Ashford, 72 years old, 30 years on the board. A man who'd seen more corporate drama than most people saw in 3 lifetimes. "Please, take a seat. We're about to begin." Chester couldn't move. His eyes were locked on William, his mind frantically trying to reconcile the image of the man he'd humiliated 40 minutes ago with the man sitting in the power seat of the most important room in the building. "Chester." Tom from finance grabbed his elbow, his voice low and urgent. "Sit down." Chester's legs moved on autopilot. He found himself in a chair halfway down the table, his hands gripping the armrests, or his heart hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. William still hadn't looked at him, hadn't acknowledged him at all. He was studying a document in front of him with the same careful attention he'd given to mopping the floor. Richard Ashford stood, commanding the room with the ease of long practice. "Gentlemen and ladies," he nodded to Jessica from HR. "Thank you all for gathering on such short notice. I know many of you have been curious about the ownership transition that's been in the works. I'm pleased to make it official." He gestured toward William with something that looked almost like pride. "This is William B. Reyes. As of midnight last night, Mr. Reyes owns a controlling interest in Apex Industries, specifically 67% of outstanding shares, and has accepted the board's unanimous invitation to serve as our new chief executive officer." The room erupted in polite applause. A few people stood. Chester's hands were frozen on the armrests. William rose smoothly, buttoning his suit jacket with one hand. When he spoke, his voice carried the same quiet authority it had when he'd asked Chester if he was certain. "Thank you, Richard. Thank you all." His eyes moved across the room, touching each face, cataloging, assessing. "I'm honored by your confidence and excited about Apex's future. I've spent the last several weeks conducting due diligence on this company, its financials, its market position, its competitive advantages." A pause. and its culture. Chester felt the blood drain from his face. William's eyes finally landed on him. "No, this morning," William continued, his tone still perfectly calm, "I decided to see that culture firsthand. The reckoning was here. And Chester? He was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. That karma doesn't just exist. It comes with a recording device and a $2.3 billion acquisition." The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Not the comfortable quiet of people waiting for more information, but the suffocating silence of a room full of witnesses realizing they'd just watched an execution, and the body was still warm. Chester's face had gone from red to white to a grayish shade that suggested his cardiovascular system was seriously reconsidering its life choices. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. William remained standing, his posture relaxed, his hands resting lightly on the back of his chair. "I've built 3 companies from the ground up," he said conversationally, as if he were discussing the weather. "And I've learned that you can't understand a company's culture from spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations. But you have to see how people behave when they think no one is important is watching." He paused, letting that sink in. "So this morning, I arrived at 6 a.m., dressed as a custodian. I wanted to observe how employees at every level are treated, how respect flows or doesn't flow through the organization." Jessica from HR had gone pale. Tom from finance was staring at his hands. Several executives were doing the mental math, trying to remember if they'd passed a janitor in the hallway this morning, trying to remember if they'd said please or thank you or anything at all. "What I discovered," William continued, his voice still calm but carrying an edge now, like a blade sliding from a sheath, "was illuminating. I watched employees who take pride in their work despite being invisible to most of you. I watched people arrive early and work hard for wages that barely cover rent." He looked directly at Chester. "And I watched a middle manager engage in a sustained campaign of humiliation, degradation, and thinly veiled racism against someone he believed was powerless to fight back." Chester finally found his voice. "Mr. Reyes, I can explain." "No." The single word cut through the air like a gunshot. William's expression hadn't changed, but something in his eyes had gone cold. "You had your chance to explain. You spent 15 minutes explaining your views on work ethic, on culture, on which people deserve respect and which people don't. I heard every word. So did the recording device I was wearing. The color that had drained from Chester's face now drained from half the room. I built this fortune by valuing competence over credentials, character over connections, and human dignity over corporate hierarchy." William said. "Those aren't just words. They're the foundation of how I run companies. And they're the foundation of how Apex Industries will operate going forward." He turned to Richard Ashford. "Richard, could you call security, please?" Richard reached for the phone without hesitation, his expression grim. Chester stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You can't do this. I have a contract. I have rights. You can't fire me for..." "For what?" William's voice was quiet, dangerous. "For creating a hostile work environment? For racial discrimination? For abusing your authority to humiliate someone you perceived as powerless?" He tilted his head slightly. "Actually, Mr. Lower, I can fire you for exactly that. And I am." 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. The same guards Chester had threatened to call on William 3 hours ago. "Gentlemen," William addressed them with the same respectful tone he'd used when calling Chester. "Sir, please escort Mr. Lower from the building." He's to collect no personal items, access no computer systems, and speak to no employees. His company email and building access have already been revoked. Chester looked around the room wildly, searching for allies, for someone to speak up on his behalf. Every executive suddenly found something fascinating to study on the table in front of them. "This is insane," Chester said, his voice rising toward hysteria. "You can't run a company like this. You can't just—" "I can," William said simply. "I do, and I will." The security guards took Chester by the arms, gently but firmly. He was still sputtering protests as they guided him toward the door, his expensive shoes dragging against the carpet, his perfectly knotted tie askew. The door closed behind him with a soft click. William waited a beat, then two, letting the silence settle. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its edge, returning to that calm, measured tone. "Let me be very clear about what just happened. I didn't fire Chester Lower because he insulted me personally. I fired him because he revealed exactly the kind of leadership culture that will no longer exist at Apex Industries." He walked slowly around the table, his hands clasped behind his back. "Starting today, we're going to build something different here. A company where respect flows in all directions, where merit matters more than pedigree, where every employee, from the executive suite to the custodial staff, is treated with basic human dignity." He stopped, looking at each face in turn. "Some of you are wondering if you're next. That's a good question to ask yourselves. Because if you've been leading the way Chester Lower led, the answer is probably yes." Jessica from HR looked like she might be sick. "But," William continued, "I'm also a believer in second chances for people willing to change. This morning was a diagnostic. What happens next depends entirely on what you do with the information." He returned to his position at the head of the table. "I'll be spending the next 30 days observing, listening, and learning. I encourage you to spend that time reflecting on the culture you've been creating and the culture you want to build." He sat down, smoothing his tie. "Now, let's talk about Q4 projections and the strategic initiatives I'm planning to implement. Richard, if you distribute the briefing materials?" As the meeting shifted into business mode, executives fumbling with folders and trying to appear engaged, William allowed himself the smallest of smiles. He'd bought a company this morning, but more importantly, he'd just sent a message that would echo through every floor, every department, every break room in the building. Real power didn't announce itself with expensive suits and raised voices. Real power was knowing exactly who you were, whether you were wearing a navy suit or a blue uniform. And real leadership meant treating every person with the dignity they deserved. Not because you had to, but because it was right. The culture change at Apex Industries had officially begun. William stood in the same hallway where Chester had humiliated him, but everything had changed. The executive floor felt different now, less like a fortress of privilege and more like a workspace where actual work happened. Gloria from the custodial staff walked past, pushing her cart. "Morning, Mr. Reyes," she said with a genuine smile. "Morning, Gloria," William replied. "How's Miguel doing? I heard his daughter got into that college program." Gloria's face lit up. "She did. Thank you for writing that recommendation letter. It meant the world to them." After she moved on, William turned to face the portrait wall, those oil paintings of former CEOs that had watched silently as Chester destroyed his own career. William had commissioned a new policy. Every employee who'd been with the company for 10 years would have their portrait added to the wall. Executives, custodians, administrative staff, everyone. The first new portrait was installed last week. It was Gloria's. As for Chester K. Lower, William had heard through the industry grapevine that he was still looking for work. Turns out, when you're fired for discrimination, and it's backed by audio recordings, companies tend to be a little hesitant to bring you on board. The HR community was smaller than most people realized, and word traveled fast. William didn't take pleasure in Chester's downfall, but he didn't lose sleep over it either. Some lessons could only be learned the hard way. He checked his watch, 6:45 a.m. Time for his weekly walkthrough. He still did them, though now everyone knew who he was. The point wasn't deception anymore. It was a connection. It was remembering that every single person in this building, from the C-suite to the loading dock, contributed to something larger than themselves, and they all deserved to be treated with dignity. As William headed toward the elevator, he passed a young manager speaking with an IT staff member. The manager said, "Please," and "Thank you." He listened when the IT person explained a problem. He treated them like a human being whose expertise mattered. William smiled. The culture was changing. Slowly, but surely. And that was worth every penny of the $2.3 billion he'd paid. So there you have it. The story of how one man's arrogance became his ultimate downfall, and how true leadership isn't about the uniform you wear, but the character you carry. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that karma is real and justice does exist, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, smash that like button. Seriously, let's get this video to 100,000 likes and show the algorithm that stories about accountability matter. Second, subscribe and turn on notifications, because I post stories like this every single week. Stories about karma, justice, workplace dynamics, and the consequences of people's actions. And third, this is the most important one. Drop a comment below telling me what story you want to hear next. Do you want more workplace justice stories? More tales of arrogant managers getting what they deserve? Or maybe you want to hear about other types of karma? Let me know in the comments, because I'm building this channel for you. Remember, treat people with dignity, not because of what they can do for you, but because it's the right thing to do. Character always wins in the end.
I'll see you in the next one. Stay humble, stay kind, and never underestimate the janitor.